I remember before TBC came out, the whole community and every single YouTuber, Twitch streamer and their dog was arguing about what classes were going to top the DPS meters. It also seemed like everyone had a drinking problem back then. Maybe that was because it was lockdown, or to be honest, maybe that was just me. But anyway, it turns out everyone was wrong, and now we know what DPS topped the logs. So let's talk about which classes will be the true top performers of TBC Classic, starting with the Warlock. The Warlock had its infamous DS Ruin spec, where you hybrid spec'd into Demonology to get Demonic Sacrifice, which increased your shadow damage by 15%, and if you sacrificed a, Succubus, or fire damage if you sacked an Imp. The Shadow Bolt spam strat was usually most optimal because of the improved Shadow Bolt talent, which boosted the damage of your next 4 Shadow Bolts by 20%, allowing you to get the biggest crits possible. But for whatever reason you didn't have a Shadow Priest, and did have a Fire Mage, you would instead spam Incinerate. But people usually only did that really in 10-man raids. Many people have probably forgot also that in tier 4 it was actually better to spec into Demonology and Maggie because people were doing some cheesy strats, let's be honest. But that's how people actually did top the logs, and that was for a number of reasons. Those fights, one, had a lot of downtime that prevented you from actually casting your spells, which meant that the melee usually creeped ahead on those kind of fights. But if you had a meaty Felguard continuously whacking the boss, then, it ever so slightly creeped your own DPS ahead. The Felguard would also help you cheese your logs slightly higher because of his cleavability, obviously. Providing he didn't die anyway. Trust me, I messed about with Demonology for fun a little bit in TBC Classic, and it was fairly irritating because healers never heal your pets. They usually don't even have pets displayed on a unit frame, so be mindful of that. The Warlock's range single target DPS was simply unbeatable. The Arcane Mage was the only spec that could come close, but the Mage needed so much more synergy, assistance, and shorter fights. The Arcane Mage was like a cyborg that needed a battery and implants, whereas a Warlock, they just turned up, ready to go, all natural, grass-fed, ready to churn up demons, especially with an AoE DPS, which was definitely the best in the game. By the way guys, if you are playing any version of Classic WoW or Retail right now, by far the fastest step-by-step leveling guide, literally designed by the world record holding speed levelers in the game, is Rested XP. It also has so many useful features like a safer version for hardcore, profession power leveling and gold making, along with a lot of class specific tips. You'll also find an optimal quest preparation route for the launch of TBC Classic and Mr. Pandaria on there that you can start working on right now, so check out the description of the video for more information on that add-on. The Beast Mastery Hunter was one of the most dominant DPS in TBC Classic. They had so many great talents, their pets were easier to keep alive, and some very powerful cooldowns, perfect for heroism burst phases. The knack to Beast Mastery Hunter was auto-shot timing. Different things like cooldowns, heroism and weapon speeds affected how fast your swing timer was, and it meant that different rotations became optimal at different haste breakpoints. So you had to learn how to adapt on the fly to buffs and your cooldowns. There was even this funky 5551 French rotation. I have no idea why it became known as that, by the way. Maybe someone could tell me in the comment section. But the skill ceiling here was trying to squeeze in damaging abilities to intentionally delay your auto shot to optimize DPS. It's a lot to get your head around, to be perfectly honest. Timing is everything with the Hunter rotation, and although it may seem simple at a glance, like people used to make jokes about how they just keybinded all their abilities to the mouse wheel, okay? True, it's quite simple, but it did require a lot of skill and patience to truly master. Especially when it came to ranged and melee weaving, I don't even want to begin trying to explain all that. The Survival Hunter wasn't a bad DPS either. It wasn't the top of the pack, but it more than made up for it with the debuffs it provided to boost the DPS of other DPS. So if you had a melee heavy setup or a hunter heavy setup, Survival Hunter was a very, very good addition that would overall increase the raid's performance. Expose Weakness increased the attack power of all attackers by 25% of your total agility for 7 seconds, and your Hunter's Mark also buffed the damage of melee attackers, instead of just other hunters. Hunters have also always been legendary farmers and levelers because having a pet just means they barely have any downtime. And lastly, we have the Warrior, the most unappreciated but true god of the Burning Crusade Classic. They were always a top of the pack DPS pretty much start to finish once they got themselves in some good enough gear. This is on single target bosses, on cleave, and definitely for clearing trash on speedrunning. And that's really because mainly you had no mana, you didn't have to stop to drink or anything. And they were a class that was actually fun in the game at this point. They actually had more than one ability to press and a satisfying rotation to try and master. There are a number of spec options actually depending on your situation, but most went for the Rampage spec. This was a basic attack power buff to be honest, but it was available after getting a crit. And the challenge here was to maintain it for as long as you can because it was a great buff to have for longer fights. It was almost like having an extra mini trinket. Some people like speccing into a hybrid Arms Fury build to pick up Death Wish when fights were getting shorter as, you know, the raid nights were getting much faster. This way you had a very powerful cooldown to optimize, you know, getting really good logs. And obviously Arms was just as competitive on the meters if you were feeling like trying something different, providing you had enough gear and the right raid setup. You also boosted the melee DPS of other players by quite a margin. The rotation was simple in theory, but it did require perfect timing and extremely fast reaction times if you wanted to get the best logs. When you get good gear on a warrior, you generate far too much rage, and capping on rage is where you start to lose DPS. So it's important to always ensure you are burning excess rage by queuing up heroic strike or cleave when appropriate. Playing warrior was the most fun when you use sweeping strikes. This caused your special attacks to also attack a nearby enemy, so when used on whirlwind and cleave, you would do ridiculous burst AoE damage with a full rage pool. Arguably the best bursty cleave damage in the game in my humble opinion. It's probably the most fun you're going to have while playing any class in TBC Classic. And there we have the gods of TBC Classic. Just because I've only picked 3 for the video doesn't mean there's, you know, only 3 classes worth playing in this expansion. There's plenty more strong DPS in the game which we will talk about in the next video, where we will cover the 5 safest class picks in TBC Classic, the classes that start strong and end strong and will always get invited to groups. But anyway, my name is Metagoblin. Until the next video, ciao.